Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today we have some insane news coming out of MagicCon Vegas. Now, for those of you who don't know, MagicCon Vegas is an annual event that they hold where they celebrate everything magic, and they usually have panels unveiling a lot of what's coming the next year in MTG, and we got just that today. So there was one panel that went over all of the new sets coming in 2025, and then there was another panel where they took a deeper dive into the new Foundation set, which is coming next month, and is supposed to sort of be a foundational set, pardon the pun, kind of like the old core sets were, to really set up Standard to be in a much healthier position. And it's supposed to be a set that rotates only once every 5 years, or potentially even stays in Standard just forever, which is pretty interesting. Now, I'm gonna have a separate video going over Foundations, all of the new cards spoiled for Foundations, and everything that's happening with Foundations next month. So look forward to that one after this video drops. But this video, I wanted to cover all of the new sets coming in 2025, some new cards that were spoiled for these new sets, and some of the changes coming to Magic overall that was unveiled for the very first time today at MagicCon Vegas. So we're going to dive right in. The first thing we need to talk about is the fact that they're seeing this as the beginning of the Foundations era. And what that means is that every set moving forward that is a Universes Beyond set is now going to be Standard legal. They're not going to build these Universes Beyond sets to be super high powered like they were in the past with the Lord of the Rings set, with the Assassin's Creed cards, that kind of thing. They're now balancing them for Standard so that every single Universes Beyond set moving forward from here on out is going to be legal in Standard and is going to have roughly the same power level as all of the other Standard sets. That is a crazy huge change, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I'm excited about certain sets that I really like the idea of coming into Standard now and being able to use those cards in more decks, be able to play with them more often. That's really interesting. But at the same time, I do feel like we're getting more Universes Beyond sets because of this, and I don't know how I feel about that, because if you start to spread the actual lore of Magic a little too thin and start to lean too much on other IPs, I don't know what that means for the growth of Magic in general moving forward. But I digress. Let's move on and talk about the timeline here. So they officially unveiled the timeline and the set names for next year. So starting off, we have, well, first of all, before we even talk about any of the sets, you'll notice here that we have 3 normal Magic sets using Magic lore and Magic universes, and 3 Universes Beyond sets. So we're getting a 50-50 split from this point moving forward. 3 of each year. That's 6 Standard legal sets every year, and they look to be exactly spread 2 months apart. So kind of a crazy release cadence moving forward. AetherDrift is coming February 14th. This is a brand new set that focuses on Chandra Nalaar. It's a death race across multiple planes. We'll talk about that in greater detail in just a minute. And then Tarkir Dragonstorm is dropping on April 11th. That is a new set in Tarkir, and I have some more details about that we'll get to in a moment as well. And then Universes Beyond Final Fantasy, which is a Standard legal Universes Beyond set, the first Standard legal Universes Beyond set, will drop on June 13th, 2025. And this is where I get excited. The idea of one of my favorite IPs, one of my favorite franchises coming to Magic, and not only coming to Magic, but coming to Magic in a Standard fashion where I can start to use these cards on Arena in all of my Standard deck techs. The idea of that is exciting, although I have to admit it's probably not exciting for everybody. I'm sure those of you out there who aren't that interested in Final Fantasy cringe at the idea of it being Standard legal, and I don't necessarily blame you, for reasons I'll get into later. But after the Final Fantasy set, we're then getting Edge of Eternities on August 1st, 2025, and this is going to be, I guess technically not Magic's first foray into science fiction, but first straight up full standard set that goes all the way into science fiction. This is going to be sort of like a space opera style set. It is going to be a Magic set. It's not using another IP. It's not a Universes Beyond, but it is going to be a sci-fi space opera style set in the vein of something like Star Wars. Think about Star Wars and you'll be along the right track. That being said, it's not Star Wars. It's its own IP. It's a Magic universe, a Magic plane. And I'm really interested in that because I really like sci-fi. So that seems super interesting to me. They could whiff it. It really depends on how they pull it off, but I'm excited for it. Then next up, the next TBA set, which I'm going to assume is coming in October of 2025, is the very first Marvel collaboration. This is a Spider-Man set. That's right, we're not just getting Marvel sets, we're starting the Marvel collaboration with a full-on Spider-Man set. Expect to see all of the normal Spider-Man villains, all of the other Spider-Man type heroes. Think of the Sony Spider-Man movieverse, and you'll start to be, you know, get a good idea of where we're starting off with this. Crazy to think that Spider-Man is going to be in Standard, and that you can build a deck with Spider-Man and face off against your friend's deck using Final Fantasy cards in Standard at Friday Night Magic. That just seems surreal and ridiculous to me, and that's where I start to have second thoughts about how I feel about having all of these Universe Beyond sets in Standard, because as much as I love having Final Fantasy there, and I'm really excited about that, the idea of Spider-Man being Standard legal and having to play against Spider-Man style cards and not really being able to 100% invest yourself in the fantasy themes and the fantasy sort of concepts that normally accompany Magic, it might pull you out of it a little bit. It might make it a little less immersive if you're sort of forced to have games against Spider-Man. But that being said, Spider-Man's a huge IP, and it's probably going to be super fun. I'm excited to see what they do with it. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. I could see it going either way. And then there's one more TBA set, another Universes Beyond set coming at the very end of the year, which I'm going to assume, if we follow this 2-month cadence that seems to be set up, is probably coming in December. And they haven't announced what that is yet. And before we start to break down each of the sets in a little bit more detail, the last thing I really just want to mention here real quick is, if they're not mentioning what the IP is yet and they're keeping those cards close to the vest, I assume that it has to do with an IP that is also gearing up to make a huge announcement next year that hasn't made that announcement yet, because why else wouldn't they tell me what it is, unless what it is dependent upon some other announcement within the IP happening. Seems interesting, and I'm really curious what that IP could be. So if you have ideas about what this third Universes Beyond set could be, definitely let me know in the comments. But we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about AetherDrift. Before we do, I want to remind you guys, at the end of this video, there is a huge change to the core rules of Magic that got announced that I'm going to be discussing at the very end of this video, so make sure you stick around to that. They're fundamentally changing the rules of Magic in one seemingly small but actually very significant way, and we're definitely going to talk about that. And then also, they changed rotation, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit too. I know it seems like they just changed rotation to 3 years, and now they're making another change to rotation, but we'll talk about that at the end as well. Let's move on and talk about AetherDrift here. Now, AetherDrift is a high-speed, high-stakes death race across 3 planes that brings fans a mixture of fresh new ways to explore Magic while delivering on high fantasy world building you love. So basically, this is a death race across 3 different planes using the Omen path. It features Chandra as the primary planeswalker, and here we have a tease of Chandra's card. Chandra is going to be racing to try to get to something or somewhere before everybody else, and I'm curious how that delves into the plot. We don't know anything about this new Chandra planeswalker other than the name is Chandra Sparkhunter. It has 3 loyalty abilities. It looks like one is an uptick, one is probably a 0 loyalty ability, and the other is a downtick ability. And it's also worth noting that there's enough of the text box above the first loyalty ability that there's also probably a static ability on this Planeswalker as well. Beyond that, we have no idea what this card does, but I'm assuming it probably thematically ties into the themes of the set. The Death Race, it seems like it's going to be a vehicle-centric set. So if you have ideas about what this card could potentially be, definitely let me know in the comments. But moving on, what could Chandra possibly be chasing down? My theory is the other card that they teased. This is the AetherSpark, a legendary artifact planeswalker equipment. Now, this is another card that they didn't give us any of the stats or details on. We don't have a text box, but there's still some telling information here. First of all, it counts as an artifact and a planeswalker, which is kind of insane, but it's an equipment. So it's going to be able to equip to most likely creatures. It has an uptick loyalty ability, a downtick loyalty ability, and a second downtick loyalty ability that's probably an ultimate. So it comes into play with loyalty counters, it has loyalty abilities, it's essentially functionally a planeswalker, except not, because it's an equipment. So my theory here is this is an equipment that can equip to any creature and turn it into a planeswalker. And it would make sense if the story revolves around the idea of everybody finds out about this AetherSpark and everybody wants it because they want to claim the spark and become a planeswalker. So everybody's sort of racing across these planes through these omen paths, trying to get to the AetherSpark first so that they can become a planeswalker. And maybe Chandra's trying to chase it down to prevent that from happening. Now, this is all just speculation and theory, but it seems pretty interesting, regardless of what this card does or what importance it has in the story. Just the fact that there are loyalty abilities and a starting loyalty on something that's not a traditional planeswalker, that's an artifact equipment, seems really crazy to me. So if you have other ideas about what this could be, what it could do, or how it could fit into the story, definitely let me know in the comments. But we're going to move on to some actual cards here that were actually spoiled. So we're going to start with the Earth Rumbler. This is 1 green and 4 for a 7/6 artifact vehicle with vigilance and trample. You exile an artifact or creature from your graveyard, and this vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. It also has crew 3. So you can crew it the normal way by tapping creatures with power totaling 3, or you can essentially crew it without having to do that by just exiling any artifact or creature from your graveyard. So pretty cool. It is just an uncommon, so it's not insanely overpowered or underrate as far as the mana, overrate as far as the power for the mana. But it seems a good example of what we can expect in this set. It's pretty obvious to me that vehicles are going to be a huge staple. If they're showing off an uncommon vehicle as one of the first cards they're showing off, then most likely vehicles are going to be very prominent in the set. Not even just sort of like a sub-theme, but probably a very major theme here. And this card itself is pretty cool, but the other cards are actually way more interesting. The next one is Daretti Rocketeer Engineer. Now, some of you probably remember Daretti. I don't remember exactly what plane he was from or what set he was from. I do know he's an existing character, but if you know what plane he's from, what set he's from, and what his old cards are like, let me know in the comments, because I'm not exactly sure. I just know I've heard the name, and I know he's been a character that's been around before. But this card in particular has star power and 5 toughness for a legendary creature goblin artificer for 1 red and 4. His power is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control, which doesn't seem like it's that great at first because he's kind of expensive, and you probably want to have an artifact out that gives him high power before you play him. But he has another ability. When he enters or attacks, you choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, you return the chosen card to the battlefield. So as soon as you slam him on turn 5, or maybe earlier with ramp, you immediately get to sacrifice one of your cheap, crappy artifacts, get back something absolutely insanely monstrous from your graveyard. Maybe it's a Portal to Phyrexia, maybe it's some other huge, valuable play that we haven't quite seen yet, maybe it's another crazy big artifact that exists within this set, who knows? but you get back something huge, he immediately becomes like a 9/5 or something like that. And you get that value right away. You get the free Portal to Phyrexia or whatever huge bomby artifact. You get like an 8/5, a 9/5, whatever. And then also, if they don't deal with him right away, he gets to trigger that every single turn. And this is good for two reasons, because first of all, you could build your deck around putting huge artifacts in the graveyard, so you constantly sacrifice something crappy and get something huge and get insane value out of 𝑑. But you could also use a bunch of artifacts that have ETB triggers, things that they do when they enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield, and then just every turn attack with it and start cycling those artifacts in and out of your graveyard, constantly putting them into the graveyard to bring something back and get its ETB, and then putting that back in the graveyard to bring the first thing back to get its ETB, every single turn swinging with 𝑑, and constantly every turn being able to cycle something in and out. Seems really interesting, so seems like there's a lot of cool ways you could use 𝑑. The potential for this one is through the roof for sure, but it's not the best card that we saw today. That goes to Bright Glass Gearhulk. That's right, we're getting a new Gearhulk, and I'm going to assume that we're actually getting a new cycle of Gearhulks. We'll probably get one for each allied color pairing, if I was to guess. But this is a mythic. This is a 4/4 artifact creature construct with First Strike and Trample for 4 mana in the colors of Selesnya, so 2 white and 2 green. Now, those mana commitments are pretty hefty, but that being said, you're getting a 4/4 First Strike Trampler for 4, which is really, really good on-rate board presence. And then the enters the battlefield ability is where it gets really crazy. When it enters, you may search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, and or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less. Reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle. This seems insane to me. You can get any 2 1-drops. You could be playing a go-wide creature deck. Maybe it's a Convoke deck. And now you can just search up 2 of your 1-drop creatures and just get automatic 3-for-1 value, which is absolute gas. Maybe you're in a sacrifice deck and you can search up like enchantments, like Hopeless Nightmare. Maybe you're playing like a Pixie deck. Maybe that becomes an Abzan deck now and you play the Gearhulk and you're able to find your 1 mana discard enchantments or your Pixie or some combination of them. It just seems like there's so much versatility in what this card could do for you. And the only real downside is the fact that the mana requirements are pretty stringent. You need double green and double white. It is going to be a little bit tricky to get there in 3-color decks. So that's something to think about when building around this guy. But the power level is nuts. The card is crazy. And if this is any sort of indication of what the rest of the cycle is going to be like, and just the rest of the cards in the set in general, I think this card is just nuts. Do I think this card is too good? Am I overpraising it? Let me know in the comments how you feel about it. I just think it's crazy, and I'm excited to see what the rest of the set brings. But that's all we have for AetherDrift for now. But that wasn't all we found out about today, because we also got a bit of an update on Tarkir Dragonstorm. And it says, building from our original visit to the plane, Tarkir Dragonstorm will deliver on 2 things people love most: factionalized clan gameplay and dragons. Which brings us to the 2 cards that were teased for the set. One being a new Sarkhan, but it is worth noting that this Sarkhan is a legendary creature. He lost his spark. He's no longer a planeswalker, so he doesn't take up the planeswalker spot for this set. The dog is excited even. Hi, I'm trying to talk about Magic. Could you go to sleep? Thank you. That honor is bestowed upon Ugin, or at least what looks like Ugin. That's right, we're getting a new Ugin Planeswalker card. There's a couple of things that give me pause about this. First of all, Ugin is supposed to be babysitting Nicol Bolas in the Prison Realm. So if he's coming back into this set, does that mean Nicol Bolas is unguarded? Could this be a hint that Nicol Bolas is coming back sooner or later? Probably sooner. I'm gonna cross my fingers. I'm a Nicol Bolas kind of guy. The idea of that excites me. But just the idea of getting an Ugin Planeswalker seems pretty crazy. We know for sure it's going to have a static ability because there is enough room in the text box for it. He's got an uptick, a neutral 0-cost loyalty ability, and a downtick ability. We don't know what any of those abilities are yet, but still a little bit of information to go on. Honestly, this set seems pretty crazy. And the one thing I do want to say is they talked about this set being a return to dragons and bringing a bunch of dragons back, but also a return to wedges. So we're going to see all of the 3-colored wedges come back. My favorite, of course, being Mardu. And these are 3-color combinations that include 2 enemy colors. So, for example, Mardu is white, and it's paired with red and black. And both red and black are enemy colors to white. So that's what makes it different from the shards that we see in Alara. The shards contain a color that has 2 friendly color combinations. So all of the Mardu wedges are going to come back, or rather all of the Tarkir wedges are going to come back, Mardu being my favorite of them, and that's confirmed. And then also the dragons are coming back in a huge way, and that's confirmed. So really exciting stuff happening with Tarkir. But that brings us to the June release, Magic the Gathering Cross Final Fantasy. And just to remind you guys one more time, this is going to be a standard legal set, which for me is really, really exciting, but is also really crazy and probably worrisome for plenty of you out there, and I don't blame you. We didn't see any cards for this yet, but they did show us some art. And it's worth noting that they mentioned specifically that the art on these cards is going to be split among traditional Magic artists, but also traditional Final Fantasy artists, and we're going to get a nice combination of both within this set. So, right off the bat, love seeing Kefka here, one of my favorite characters from the Final Fantasy series, probably the best villain, well, maybe second best villain that series has ever seen. But moving on, we've also gotten art for a Moogle. That's right, we're getting Moogles. Additionally, we see some art here for Lightning. They did confirm that they're going to cover every single iteration. Every single game in the series is going to have at least some cards in this set, from the first one all the way up until 16, which is pretty nuts. We also see Tidus and Yuna here, embracing each other. If you know, you know. And then the last card that has me the most excited, 𝑺𝒑𝒐𝒊𝒍𝒆𝒓 from Final Fantasy XIV. I was a little bit worried they wouldn't be including 14 in this set, since 14's kind of a different thing. It's an online game. I played a lot of 14. Personally, I started playing it COVID quarantine, back when that happened in 2020. I probably put like 2,000 hours into that game that year because I was basically on forced vacation for that year. That's also why I started this channel way back then. So, but that's a story for another time. 𝑺𝒑𝒐𝒊𝒍𝒆 being one of the most popular antagonists within that game. Such a great character. So cool to see we're gonna, see that character and other things from Final Fantasy XIV included in this set. I'm really excited about Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering. This is just a dream come true for me. Let me know in the comments if you're excited or if you think it's trash, because you very well might. But moving on, we have our next in-universe lore set. This is not a Universes Beyond set. This is called Edge of Eternities. Explore the cosmos and its many planets and systems in this space-themed science fantasy set. So, this set seems really cool to me because they're finally going full bore into science fiction / space opera. Think along the lines of Star Wars. And I just love that kind of stuff. Granted, I do admit this isn't for everyone. This isn't for every Magic fan. Magic is supposed to be fantasy, and they do kind of try and spin it as a science fantasy set. There's still going to be fantasy in this, but I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of you out there just don't want any of that in your fantasy card game. I can't blame you for that. Me personally, I am really excited about this because it just ticks all of the boxes of all of the things I'm interested in. Does that mean it's going to be great? No, it could be trash. But I'm optimistic and hopeful that this ends up being awesome because I kind of love sci-fi. I don't know what to tell you. Again, we didn't see any cards for this set, but we do have some arts that hint at the themes. We see a lush planet here. We see a very interesting looking concept for a character with a melee weapon. Looks really cool. And then we also see some space whales, because that's a thing, I guess. Seems interesting. And then last but not least, confirmation that 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛 is coming back in this set. That's right, we're getting Space 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛, which just seems absolutely crazy to me. I've been wanting to see 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛 come back for a long time now. I've been wanting to see a space sci-fi style set for quite a while now, never actually thinking it would happen. So seeing this just makes me all sorts of happy. Let's move on though. Next up we have the Spider-Man set coming TBA 2025, and I'm gonna guess it's October, because it makes sense with the 2-year cadence. We haven't seen anything on this. All we know is that it's happening, and that other Marvel sets are also happening at a later date. Which brings us back to our timeline. So AetherDrift in February, Tarkir Dragonstorm in April, Final Fantasy in June, Edge of Eternities, being Magic's Star Wars style set, is coming in August. Spider-Man TBA, probably October, and then a third unreleased set, probably December. And like I asked at the beginning of this video, if you have ideas about what you think that third IP could be, definitely let me know in the comments. It's either going to be something that has a big announcement that they haven't announced yet, and so Magic isn't allowed to announce their part of it, or maybe it is Star Wars. Maybe Edge of Eternities is trying to prepare us for the Star Wars set and get us used to the idea of sci-fi being in our Magic, so that they can launch a Star Wars set at the end of the year. I will say this, they will definitely do a Star Wars set at some point, for sure. But is this the set? Is it going to be the end of the year Universes Beyond set for 2025? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, but I wouldn't be surprised with us getting Edge of Eternities if they're definitely laying the foundational groundwork for something like that. And that brings us back to the last thing I want to talk about. The changes coming to Magic. The big one being, they've changed the way damage is being assigned in combat. Now, it used to be, and it has been up until now, it even is still now, that if you attack and your opponent blocks with multiple blockers, you would have to choose the order in which you assign damage to those blockers. And then your creature would do damage to the first one assigned first until it dealt lethal damage, and then the rest of the damage would spill over to the next one, and so on and so forth. They're completely changing the way that works. So no longer will you have to choose what order the blockers are lined up in before you go to combat damage. Instead, you will go straight to combat damage, and during combat damage, you'll get to individually choose which amount of damage goes to which creatures. And this actually creates a lot of gameplay diversity that wasn't in the game before. So one example is, now, if you want to double block and use a combat trick like a Giant Growth to protect your guys and make it so you lose no guys, that doesn't work, because you can no longer respond to how combat damage is divvied up. So if I swing with a 5/5 and you block with two 2/2s, or two 3/3s we'll say, and then you try to Giant Growth one of them, I can just choose to assign the combat damage to the other one during the combat damage step. So you don't get to make it so that you don't lose either of them. You can just make sure that you don't lose a specific one. So in that way, the attacker kind of gets a little bit of an extra edge when people are blocking with multiple blockers than they used to get. It's also worth noting that this makes Death Touch a lot better. If you're using a creature that's Death Touch and your opponent blocks with, like, say, 3 creatures, you can just choose how you divvy up that Death Touch damage, even after they get a chance to respond. The way this works now is they don't get any more chances to respond once you're choosing how the damage goes to what creature. It's all on you at that point, so you get the last decision. Your opponent can't respond, they can't cast instants, they can still cast instant speed tricks and spells before you go to combat damage to buff up their guys or to do whatever, but they can't actually respond to how you divvy up the damage. So This new change to the rules fundamentally changes how combats are going to play out, gives the attacker a bit more of an advantage, and is probably going to make certain keyword abilities and certain rules a little bit better or worse than they used to be. We're going to have to try it out and see how it works before we really get a sense of how that will happen and how things will shake out. But I have a feeling that this change is going to be more impactful than it seems on the surface, especially with things like Menace, which seem way better and crazier now than they used to be. But that being said, that brings us to the end of the video. The one last thing I want to talk about really quick before I say goodbye is the other change coming to standard rotation. Now, they already changed standard to have a 3-year rotation. They did that last year. But what they're doing now is they're changing it so that rotation does not happen in the fall anymore like it used to. It's going to be happening at the start of a new year. So starting in 2027, when the first set of a calendar year releases, so the first set of 2027, probably in February of 2027, that's when rotation will happen. And all of the sets from the oldest year will all rotate out together. I think this is actually probably a good decision. Now, that being said, I don't like 3-year rotation anyway. I think there should be less sets in standard. I think we should rotate more often, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. What I will say is I do think this is better than doing it in September. It's less confusing because as of right now, you have to think like, oh, rotation happened, so some sets from 2022 or whatever it might be aren't legal and some of them are, and it kind of gets confusing. So nothing is changing until the first set in 2027 releases. At that point, Bloomburrow and Duskmourn and everything before that will rotate out. And what's interesting about that is Bloomburrow and Duskmourn specifically will get a little less time in standard than they otherwise would have, because normally that rotation for those two sets wouldn't have happened until the next fall. So they will be in standard slightly less time, but they'll still be in standard way longer than they used to be back when we had a 2-year rotation. So I'm not mad about that. I actually think that's a good thing. I think the less sets we have in standard right now, the more we can trim it down at this point, the happier I am, because I just think the card pool is too crazy and unmanageable. But again, that's my opinion, and that's a discussion for another day. So anyway, thank you so much for liking the video. I do have another video on the way going over all of the Foundation stuff we learned today and all of the new spoilers for Foundations. There are a ton of Foundation spoilers coming. That set is dropping in just a couple weeks, so definitely look forward to that set. Like the video if you haven't already, so you can help this video get out to more people, help the channel grow. I appreciate it so much. And make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, so you never miss an upload. Tons of crazy spoiler content on the way, and some crazy Duskmourn deck techs, so look forward to that. I'll see you guys in a little bit. I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Wonders of the First. Wonders of the First is a brand new collectible card game similar to games like Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, featuring a unique action-based resource economy that helps avoid pitfalls like Mana Flood or Mana Screw, and a battlefield containing multiple realms that unlock over time as you fight for control of the stones. The first 400 card set is called Existence and will launch to retail in the fall, but playtest team starter kits are available to order now. And they haven't forgotten about all you collectors out there. The game contains alternate borderless art variants, as well as highly sought after limited edition numbered prints, culminating in a 1-of-1 stone foil. And the best part is that the developers have a community first approach, with 8 print and play decks available on their website, as well as a version of the game available on Tabletop Simulator, all for free. For more information, be sure to check out wondersccg.com today. That's wondersccg.com. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.